Hello, my name is Tamara Sawyer. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator at Minnesota Management and Budget. I have the honor of serving as the moderator for this session, Accessible Visual Content, the 5th session in our celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Next slide. We've got two speakers today who are going to talk about how visual content creators can create accessible materials. They're also going to touch on how the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines benefit document creators. I'll let them introduce themselves. Jessica, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Tamara. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Cavazos, and I work as a health educator at the Minnesota Department of Health.
Thanks, Jessica. Jeremy?
Hi, I'm Jeremy Depew. I'm the Senior Graphic Designer at Minnesota IT Services, the state's central information technology agency.
Thanks for the introductions. I know you guys have a lot of great information, so I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Tamara. Hi, this is Jessica. Briefly, this presentation is for visual content creators at any level in state government, whether you're a graphic designer or someone who uses images in their documents or creates simple data visualizations like graphs or charts. We will be talking about why accessibility is important, provide you with resources for making your work accessible, talk about the standards that inform digital accessibility here at the state, and how what happens if digital accessibility standards change, understanding your software limitations, and we will be closing with a Q&A. Next. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of visual content creators. Next. Contrary to what you may have heard, it's possible to make attractive, accessible designs. The example on this slide, it's a great example. Jeremy made it. He doesn't remember this, but he made it a few years ago, and it's an infographic using the Minnesota state brand colors that talks about the testing and review process for our InDesign accessibility community of practice. As you can probably see, it looks great, but if you can't see it, it is also an accessible infographic on the Office of Accessibility website. So if you're new to state service, incorporating digital accessibility into your design can feel foreign. If you're a creative person, it might feel very confining, but with some know-how, you can design wonderful work that looks good and is useful and accessible to everyone. Next.
People perceive the world in different ways, and I want to illustrate that by sharing a pie chart that shares the total agency budget, as well as a breakdown of how that budget is spent. If I were a graphic designer who didn't add good alt text, a screen reader user may not benefit from any of that information at all. If I added the alt text financial graph, that's all they may know. They may not see the numbers, they may not see the total, it may be useless to them. Alternatively, people who are new to designing for accessibility may not consider color blindness. In this example, red and green are two really famously bad colors for color blindness. And you can see that it translates as tan colors, not very useful. There are several different kinds of color blindness, but by considering color use in charts and graphs, we can make something that's usable for everybody.
This is Jessie. Accessibility is important and it's for everyone. So first I'm going to ask you to visualize curb cuts. You know, those little ramp transitions from the sidewalk to the road. Our Chief Accessibility Officer, Jay Wyant, uses this as a great example. Curb cuts were originally designed to help make sidewalks accessible for people who used wheelchairs. The first curb cut was installed in Michigan in 1945 to help disabled World War II veterans. But we all use curb cuts for a variety of reasons. We might be pushing a stroller, pulling a suitcase. It's easier to navigate when you're carrying heavy items, pushing a shopping cart into a parking lot. If you suffer from joint pain, use crutches or a cane occasionally, everyone can benefit from using a curb cut. Accessibility, digital accessibility, is the same. Everyone can benefit from it. As state employees, we are stewards of the information that Minnesotans use to make decisions about their lives and access services. It is our duty to make sure that everyone is able to access the information we share. Equitable access is not just for information. It also applies to websites, apps, and the software that we use to do our jobs. By providing equitable access, it's the law, it's for everyone, and it's the right thing to do. It's everyone's responsibility. So whether you're creating a Word document, graph, presentation, PDF for the web, you should include accessibility in your workflow. Next. How do we measure digital accessibility? For the initiated and uninitiated, this is from WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which defines how we make web and digital content more accessible to people with disabilities. It's an international standard that's published by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, that the state has adopted and mandates. The WCAG gives us measurable success criteria for a variety of things, including, next, document structure. So document structure and the proper use of headings is what makes a document navigable. It makes your interactive automated table of contents possible when you open a PDF, and instead of scrolling through 500 pages, you can select a bookmark and be taken directly to the selection that you are interested in. It's assistive technology users can use headings like an outline to navigate through your document. For visual readers, it's also helpful to navigate through and visually scan a document. Document structure also includes bulleted and numbered lists, and it's important to use document styles. It provides the tag, but it's also a visual reminder of what level heading you're using. An example of this is when you're online and you're looking at a great recipe. We've probably all had that experience. I just want to make this chocolate cake, not read endlessly about how they took all day to get the cake done, the multiple trips they had to go to the grocery store. Can't I just skip to the recipe? Document structure would rescue you there. Next. Reading order is another important one. So think about it as a newspaper. You have a lot of columns. You have a variety of stories, and each story is probably continued from another page. So you might have the beginning, the middle, and the end of a lot of different stories. Reading order allows users to read the document in the order you wish it. So you should be aware of reading order in InDesign and PowerPoint and PDF. They all create the same things, but the steps to get there are slightly different. You can optimize your source document so there's less manual adjustment needed later. But getting back to that example, if you have a document, you can make sure that the users are able to tab through it or the screen reader accesses it in the information you would like it read. If this doesn't happen, you might hear something like this. This doesn't make any sense. I thought I was learning about texting scams, but now the text is talking about electronic bikes. And why is Brian Dozier talking about walk-up music? That person was reading one headline and then they encountered 3 different articles, assuming that they were in the same document. And that could be very confusing. Next. Color contrast. As you saw with Jeremy's example, those ugly old guacamole colors are really hard to distinguish between. High contrast between colors is important for everyone, especially people with low vision or who are colorblind. If someone can't read your text because of color contrast, they're missing out on important information. The state, we often see this when people are working with the main accent green on white background. It is not accessible. It's very hard to read even if you have your full range of vision. If you're using color alone to distinguish between different values on a chart, someone who is colorblind may not be able to see that difference. Text and images need to be seen against background colors. Space, patterns, and outlining can be helpful for visual images, such as graphs and charts. In Jeremy's donut graph, you saw that there was white space between each of the wedges. That helped give more contrast between each section. So even if the colors looked the same, you would be able to see that they were different wedges of information. They're also helpful when you print in grayscale. There are desktop tools available for measuring contrast, and you should always check your colors and not assume that they are accessible. If they look accessible, make sure you test that. So my quote today is, all of the graph segments look to be the same color. How am I supposed to understand this important information? When you disregard something like color contrast, you're actually creating a disparity in the information you're presenting to people. Next. Alt text. Alt text is used to provide a textual description of an image. It can be read by screen readers, which allows content to be used by people with visual or cognitive disabilities. It also happens to help if you have slow broadband and you don't want to download images in your email. You know if they're important or not. Some images that we use are purely decorative and some are informative. Others are just used as visual cues, like shapes and images used as visual cues for background shades, line breaks, frames, etc. Those can be artifacted, so they're ignored by screen readers. They're purely image cues. Some images are decorative, or as I like to call them, visual fluff. They don't convey information, but they're pleasing to the eye. Decorative images should include alt text, but they can be very simple. Some images are informative. Images are great. It gives us another way to share complex information, but it shouldn't be the only way we share information. So it's important that everything is conveyed through text, what the image is illustrating. Alt text is contextual. You can have the same image, and depending on the purpose of that image, you might have different alt text, depending on the context of use. For example, if you're in an art history class, it's important to know that the image you're using is actually an oil painting showing a specific technique. So the example I like to use is a 1985 Topps baseball card of Raleigh Fingers. If you are not familiar with Raleigh Fingers, he played for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he had this massive Captain Hook mustache, like the curly Q ones that go up towards your nose. It was gorgeous if you like mustaches. Depending on the context of what you're writing, you might just say, here's a 1985 baseball card of Raleigh Fingers. If you're writing about the Milwaukee Brewers, you might include some of his stats. But if you're writing a paper on facial hair in Major League Baseball, you're probably going to want to describe what his mustache looks like. That's the important part that you're trying to convey. Next.
One of the nice things about the web content accessibility guidelines is that it's measurable. You can measure the success criteria. In the example on screen here, we have the color contrast analyzer, which is a desktop tool for testing color contrast of text. You can see that Minnesota Blue is measured against a white background. It passes both level AA and level A, and by extension, so if it passes AAA, it's going to pass AA and single A for both WCAG level 2.0 and WCAG 2.1. The level of adherence for the state of Minnesota is WCAG 2.0 level AA, and the state is in early stages of evaluation for the possible adoption of WCAG 2.1. So what happens if digital accessibility standards change? WCAG 2.1 is an attempt to bridge some gaps that exist with 2.0, and it's focused on serving people with different cognitive needs. Most success criteria are directed at web content, but it could affect other types of projects as well. It's not clear yet exactly how it'll affect PDFs and documents, but it's being examined by a cross-agency work group. It could affect color use, interactive elements like buttons, and more. Your communications department will keep you informed of changes and updates. Those with preliminary questions can reach out to agency accessibility coordinators if they have questions. So there's lots of resources available to you, both as a graphic designer or as just somebody who uses graphics in their work. So my absolute favorite resource is accessibility coordinators. These people are very, very knowledgeable. And I would say make friends with them and be in lockstep with them the entire way. As in your journey as a graphic designer, you're going to learn a lot. Accessible document templates are a great resource. The Office of Accessibility website has great resources both for everybody and for graphic designers. There's a digital accessibility newsletter. And then there's specialized software tools as well, like Acrobat Pro's Accessibility Checker and the Color Contrast Analyzer, which is a tool that I shared with you earlier. If you're a graphic designer like myself, there are some fantastic tools that you can use in your work. There are, again, accessibility coordinators, my favorite resource, but there are communities of practice at the state. One that I like is the InDesign Accessibility Community of Practice. There are resources on the Office of Accessibility website for both accessible maps and for InDesign accessibility. There are quick cards on the website, and as a designer, you might find use in some software tools like Common Look. Common Look is an extension it's a plugin for Acrobat Pro, and what it does is it helps you take a very granular look at your document for accessibility. It's essentially it's like a checker on steroids. WebAIM is a tool that helps you identify whether your on-screen content is accessible. And then there are another tool for Creative Cloud apps is color blindness filters. I like to use these for Photoshop and Illustrator because, like the earlier example of the bar chart where we had red and green and orange that didn't convert well for color blindness, these color blindness filters will actually help you understand how a person with color blindness may perceive your design. Knowing your software limitations is also a really important thing as a designer, especially when you're first getting into it. As time goes on, software is becoming more accessible, but we can't lean on our software and assume that it's automatically going to make our work accessible or that we don't have to do anything additional. It's important to know your software's limitations and work around these software constraints so that we can meet our state's accessibility standard of WCAG 2.0 level AA. On the screen, I have a screenshot of the accessibility checker in Adobe Acrobat Pro, and it shows a bunch of different accessibility issues that you may encounter. So I'm going to share 3 examples now of different situations where you need to work around accessibility issues in software. Example number 1 is hyphenation. We've all encountered hyphenation. Hyphenation is just breaking a word between lines and the characters are separated by a dash character. Because this is so common, we may think that this is okay, but it's actually not. It can cause screen reading errors. It can cause comprehension issues with some of our users, and it can also cause tagging problems with hyperlinks. In the example I have on my screen, we have the words, a link that says commodity type IT services, and it's broken across 2 lines. So not only is that going to cause reading comprehension issues with some people, but because the hyperlink is broken across 2 lines, it may actually tag as 2 separate hyperlinks and they may not work. Hyphenation is enabled by default in most desktop publishing softwares like Microsoft Word and InDesign. Fortunately, the fix is really easy. All you have to do is disable the hyphenation. That's what I do in all of my work, and I find that it makes my documents more usable. So example number 2 of needing to work around an accessibility limitation in a software is Adobe Illustrator. So there's this thing called ligatures, and what a ligature is it's a visual joining of 2 different characters, which is also called a glyph in the graphic design world. And there's certain common characters like FF, FI, FL. Those are all situations where you'll commonly see these joined ligatures. So in the example on the screen, we have FI, and you notice that the dot on the I kind of awkwardly bumps into the ascender or top part of the letter F. What the font designer has done is created a glyph to join those 2 characters. Graphic designers love glyphs because they're visually very, very appealing. They're pretty, but they cause problems in documents. If you're exporting a PDF from Adobe Illustrator, it'll cause your Word to not read correctly with the screen reader, and it will also cause a character encoding issue to be flagged in Adobe Acrobat's accessibility checker. This is not a known problem in Adobe InDesign. This is just happening in versions of Adobe Illustrator that I've tested. So keep in mind which softwares this is a problem for. The solution, just like hyphenation, is really easy. All you have to do is simply disable the ligatures. Now, this third example here is a bit more generic, and I want to let people know that you should be wary of templates that you might download. I'm not talking about state of Minnesota's templates here. I'm talking about when you go into PowerPoint and you use just a generic, you find some template that looks splashy and it looks great and it looks fun, and so you decide to use it. Alternatively, you might download a template for Adobe InDesign or some other application. This advice is not application specific. The advice here is to not assume that somebody who has designed and is offering a template, a third-party template, has optimized this template for accessibility. There's not an even knowledge about accessibility in the graphic design world. At the state, we're very focused on it. People outside of the state may not be. I have an example, two examples of hyperlinks on the screen here. The first example has a light blue hyperlink color against a white background. That hyperlink color, if you were to use Color Contrast Analyzer, the tool that I talked about in some of the previous slides, you'll find that it fails WCAG 2.0. There's a deeper blue hyperlink color just underneath it, and it's not dramatically deeper, but it is much more readable, and it passes WCAG, not just WCAG 2.0, but WCAG 2.1, level AA, and level AAA. I mentioned earlier that if it passes a higher level, it automatically passes the lower levels as well. So again, be wary of templates. And also, this is a very excellent case for using the state of Minnesota's templates, especially for office products. Your agency very likely offers templates for PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, maybe even Excel. And these have been vetted for accessibility. And you know that when you're using these, you have a safe starting place for accessibility. Additional work is always needed, but I like to call them an accessible starting place. So I hope that's helpful to you.
As we've shared today, with a little know-how, you as a creator of visual materials can design work that's both visually impactful and useful for everyone. So check out our resource list, challenge your own assumptions about how your software works and how you work, and let us know if you have any questions. With that, I'll hand it back over to Tamara.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Jeremy, for helping us celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day.